Welcome to A Study in Sherlock, the podcast where we investigate the many faces of Holmes and Watson. Each episode will take a closer look at the actors who step into those iconic roles, what they bring, what they change, and what they reveal about the world's most famous detective partnership. We'll review classic films, groundbreaking TV series, forgotten radio dramas, stage performances, and even modern audio adaptations. Some will be brilliant, some less so, but all of them are part of the story because Sherlock isn't just one character. He's a performance, a legacy, a puzzle that's still being solved. Whether you're a lifelong Holmes fan or just stepping onto Baker Street for the first time, the game is afoot.
Игра началась.
I have to redo that. I wasn't supposed to cut it off. But if you
Do it
heard
again.
this one,
Игра началась.
that is the game is afoot in Russian. Now,
Very nice.
I am one of your hosts for anybody listening, Bruce McIntosh. I also host the Just the Runners podcast. And my co-host, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Bruce. I'm Eric Harper. I'm the co-host of Study in Sherlock podcast. I am also the creator and co-host of Neighborhood Bookstore podcast, an author interview podcast, where every episode we take a book from an author's back catalog off the shelf at a used bookstore. We read it, we analyze it, and then we discuss its creation with the author. I also occasionally pop into Just a Runner, although I do not run.
That's all right. We do occasionally discuss some books on there.
We do. It's always a fun time.
I should be doing that more and more. That's become the thing. We'll get into this episode's topic. We had decided to discuss the Soviet Sherlock Holmes, and they were made from 1979 to 1986, I believe. And it starred, I'm sure I will be butchering all the Russian names. Vasily Livanov played Sherlock Holmes, and you had Vitaly Solomin as Dr. Watson.
Yes, indeed. There they are.
And
Bruce, I want to thank you for bringing this show to my attention. I had never heard of it before. I never would have heard of it if you hadn't invited me to podcast with you, and I really enjoyed watching it.
I've enjoyed them. I just want to say they are in Russian with closed captions. If you go to watch it, they are all 11 episodes are available on YouTube. If anyone gets the urge, or if you know Russian, to make it even easier. So it actually takes a little more effort, I think, than watching just a regular show, because anytime anything's with closed captions, and I kind of looked into it. I don't know your feeling about it. There's no voiceover. They've never done a voiceover of this. And
Okay, so it was never dubbed. That I don't think that surprises me. I have not seen much media production escape Soviet Russia.
there's neither have I. And some of the people in this show, including Livanov, were very big actors and award-winning actors and things for Soviet television. I have I'll go over a little bit of information that I have about Vitaly Livanov. There's actually a sculpture of Holmes and Watson based on them in front of the United Kingdom's embassy in Moscow. They actually got very
I love knowing that. That's very cool.
It gets better because he is very well received worldwide. Has I think I'm on my wrong page in my notes here. Livanov was born, and this is very important here. He's actually still alive, and starting from the date of we're recording on, it's already past this. He's 91 now. We just missed his birthday. It was on July 19th. He was born in 1935. So a little belated birthday to Vasily.
Yes. Happy birthday.
And according to when I was able to research about him, he did come from a famous theater family. And his father was Boris Livanov. Perhaps you've heard of him if you know very much about Russian theater. He went to the Moscow Art Theater. Actually, many of the famous actors knew him. He knew many of them growing up. And there was I write that down. He was actually named after another Vasily, after a famous actor friend of his father's. And
very nice.
He spent World War II. They had evacuated the city because of the Nazis, Germany invading Russia. And up until 1943, there was like 3 or 4 years they were out. Maybe it was only 2 or 3 that they had to evacuate. In 1943, he got to go back. 1958, he graduated acting at the Boris Shulkin Theater Institute. I know nothing about that, but it sounded interesting. In his first film, he started with a lead in Letter Never Sent. It was shot in Tazia was the thing, but that actually was it's an area in Russian that was extremely cold. I'm not sure they weren't in Siberia for this. It was negative 40 degrees Celsius, and the director filmed shouting scenes outside in the woods at negative 40 degrees. And this caused Livanov to lose his voice for 2 weeks. And when it came back, it gave him a very unique hoarse timbre, they called it. I think if you listen to him, and it is a little bit of a distinctive voice. That became his trademark, that voice.
Interesting. Yeah, he's a very compelling character and a compelling actor, and he does have an interesting voice.
And he was actually quite famous for being a director also. And then in 1979, like I mentioned earlier, they did the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. And for that time period, and this is before Jeremy Brett was in Granada's Sherlock Holmes.
It is by several years.
And they are giving, I can't think of any time back then if they were giving Dr. Watson equal billing or right up there in the title with Holmes.
Yeah, that was my first reaction. I'm glad you brought that up. Most shows are called Sherlock Holmes or The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. This one, they put Watson right up there. He gets equal billing. This is the version that I watched on YouTube said Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. I think the full title is actually considered to be The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. I was very impressed. As you and I know, like in a lot of ways, my personal measure for a successful production is how well they understand Watson, because Holmes, as I always say, is the flashier character. It's very easy to become enamored with him, but it's hard to know what to do with Watson in an adaptation. And I think they did a good job. We'll come back to that.
And Livanov, in his personal life, he was married twice. First time from 58 to 70. They had a daughter, Anastasia. And then from 72 on, he was married to, we're just going to call her Elena. The rest of the name is just a little too much for me. They had 2 sons, Boris and Nikolai.
Lovely. I'm sure that our Russian listeners will forgive us.
I hope so. Do the best I can with Elena. And Watson was played by Vitaly Solomin. He was born in 1941, and regrettably, he did pass away on May 27th, 2002. He had started acting in 1960, and when I read, I'd never heard of him except for this part. 71, he played a Cossack Roman in a film called Doria, and that shot him up to fame. So he must have done a fine job in that. Also, a little bit, a couple other people I want to mention. The director, Igor Maglanovkov, I don't know if you saw his name or not, would not a real big fan of Conan Doyle, it says.
Interesting.
And so but he did want to keep it close to the source material. And when we get into it, I do think with that, and there were a few departures, and one of my favorite side characters I put in here, and I think this is the most I've seen her in any of the shows, Mrs. Hudson. Rena Zelanola. You'll have to forgive me. I this last name got me. Zelyonaya. So, but Rena, born November 7th, 1901. She would pass away April 1, 1991, almost 90. I wrote, she had actually won some awards and was known for being a good comic actress for many
Very
years
nice.
before the show was made. And I thought she brought a nice part to it, added a little humor. And I don't remember seeing Mrs. Hudson, like I said, used as much in the way that she was with this. There was several instances.
Often in the background.
She's in the background, or she'll just bring in tea or something. And this was one of the more interesting. Well, that's just a little bit about the actors involved.
Very cool.
What's your first impression that you'd like to share about this?
You know what, Bruce? I really want to thank you for introducing me to this. I knew that I believed that reviewing this show was going to be a challenge, and I did not expect to like it as much as I did. And I'll tell you candidly, when I started watching it, it grabbed me almost immediately, and it has quickly become one of my favorite adaptations of Holmes and Watson. I think that it's very well cast. I think that Vasily Livanov is a very credible Holmes. I especially love Vitaly Solomin's portrayal of Dr. Watson, and I really like the way that this production was carried out. And I'll say more about that in a minute, but what do you think?
I do agree that it is a little bit more of a challenge to view these because they are in Russian and you're doing the whole thing closed caption, but it is definitely up there. They stick very close to the source material. I think one of the changes they made was Holmes had more humor to him than in most other adaptations. I thought it was a good change. I do like the fact that they did a study in Scarlet for the most. That was one of their first episode, and I thought they did a very good job with that episode, and they did really draw me in. Time constraints, I have to admit, I have a couple more episodes to go.
Sure. I focused my viewing on the first episode, which was sort of a combined adaptation of A Study in Scarlet and The Adventure of the Speckled Band. And then also their adaptation of The Final Problem, which they called Deadly Fight or Mortal Fight. I have to give this show a lot of credit. This is not only the first one I've seen that put Watson in the title, it's the first adaptation that I've watched where they actually show us the introduction of Watson to Holmes. In most productions, the filmmakers assume that the audience is already familiar enough with Holmes and Watson as characters because they're everywhere, that they just leap right into the adventures. And this show really took its time. The entire first half of episode 1 was devoted to Holmes and Watson getting to know each other. I thought that was really well done. And to their credit, they did it in such a way that it made Watson an equal in these proceedings. So, for example, the first 30 minutes of episode 1 is taken from A Study in Scarlet, where Watson is introduced to Holmes by Stanford to be a roommate. Watson is newly back from the East. He's looking for a place to live. And, I'm sure everyone listening is familiar with it. But to their credit, the filmmakers let all of that play out. And not only do they adapt it fairly closely, they build upon it, right? So we don't just see them get introduced, right? We're given insights into each of the characters, and then they gradually get to know each other. So first we see Watson moving in. They distinguish themselves from each other. He agrees to be flatmates with Holmes. He brings his stuff in. And they quickly establish these characters as equal. So for example, the whole universe, I think, is very well established. I love the set design of 221B Baker Street. A lot of productions that I've seen have established their residents as, like a crowded but comfortable, squared away Victorian men's lodging, right? This is the first show that I've seen where when we come in, it's all of those things, but it's also chaotic. Holmes is in the middle of his experiment to identify hemoglobin straight from a study in Scarlet. His lab is set up in the living room of 221B. It's chaotic. It's messy, it's disorganized, and it's exactly what I would expect. It's probably the most lived in version of Baker Street that I've seen. A lot of them look realistic, but I think this is the one that most looked like someone actually lived there. What do you think?
I agree with you. I thought it looked more lived in, I guess. And I did like the fact that pretty much majority of what was happening came straight from A Study in Scarlet. I think they did add a little twist in there with Watson thinking Holmes might be a criminal. And I thought that was just kind of a nice humorous little till he finds out the truth.
It is. But also they don't play it as a gag. It's literally a way for the characters to not only get to know each other, but for them to blossom to the audience who's watching as well. I thought that was a very interesting dynamic because in the Conan Doyle stories, Watson is our entree into the universe of Sherlock Holmes, right? Most adaptations do that, but he's sort of a bystander. And this Watson is not only our entree into the Soviet Holmes universe, but we literally get to know Holmes through Watson. We are experiencing this through his eyes. So he sees these unusual things happening, like the Baker Street irregulars showing up, all manner of strange characters coming and going from Baker Street that he doesn't yet know are versions of Holmes in disguise, right? And all of these things. And he comes to a very reasonable conclusion inside the storytelling here that Holmes might be a criminal. It's very credible, and it's a very interesting way to do that. Especially because in a lot of productions, even good ones, Watson is a very credulous character. He's sort of like the companion. He's the person that Holmes talks to so that the audience can hear what Holmes is thinking. But in this, it literally makes Watson an equal because he's the first detective that we're introduced to, right? He's playing detective in all of this, and all of his observations of what is going on are reasonable. They turn out to be wrong. His conclusions are wrong, but it's a great way to get to know Watson, get to know the universe, reveal Sherlock gradually, and have Watson be an intelligent and observant character in his own right.
Yeah. Because when we were speaking of one of the things I wrote as far as the notes in this, instead of writing Reich, which would have been German, they wrote revenge in the blood. And there was I think this was in the second episode. That one's still based on Study in Scarlet, where he was making deductions about a man, and then he started laughing because he said, "Yes, that's my brother, my Mycroft." They don't actually introduce him. He could have just made the whole thing up at the time because they didn't actually introduce Mycroft in this episode. Eventually do. And then there was this one scene that caught me. They were in this small car driving somewhere, which I'm trying to think of the time frame or something, but it seemed like, or maybe they were in a horse, but it was like this small, it seemed like 5 people looking like a group of clowns getting out of this little vehicle. And I think they did try to keep some humor in here. Well, a lot of the script in many of the episodes and stuff, it's almost like you're reading straight from Doyle's books.
Yeah,
On
I agree.
many of
They're
the
very faithful.
episodes. It was extremely faithful. There was some changes. What question I have for you? How do you feel they caught? Because I know I believe it was filmed in St. Petersburg, in Russia. Do you feel they got the English Victorian era look and feel to it? I mean, it was tough to do considering where they were.
It was. I guess what I'll say is they presented the world very credibly as being from the past. You know, I would say I was convinced that it was the 1800s. I don't know that I was convinced that it was London. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly.
But I also was really engaged with the show, so I was willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. And the audience for this program would have been Soviet Russian citizens, and I'm sure that it was perfectly credible and enjoyable for them too. You know, I think that the London scenes were fine. I think that in episode 1, the first 30 minutes are taken from A Study in Scarlet, and then at the 30-minute mark, they made a choice that I think was a wise one to pivot to a pretty straightforward adaptation of The Adventure of the Speckled Band. And so this takes Holmes and Watson out into the country to Stockmorton Mansion. And when they get there, like, we're presented with a large country house that looks very distinctly like a Russian dacha to me. It did not look like a British manor house in any way, you know, but it didn't need to, you know, like, I went into this knowing that it was a Russian production. I was prepared to see Russian scenery. And I think that for what they had access to, they did it very well. I didn't necessarily believe that it was London, but I believed that it was the 1800s, if that makes sense.
I do believe they got the 1800s part right for the overall majority. Inside 221 B Baker Street, I thought that looked a little more like you're expecting it to look for being Holmes and Watson's home. Some of the outside scenes, I do think they probably had a hard time. But I thought for one it was, and the time frame where it was filmed, you know, obviously the Soviet Union probably was not going to let them go outside the country to film anything. So,
right. Well, and even, like, you're right. Like, we have to acknowledge that this was a fairly oppressive time in their history. And, like, I don't want to overplay that. But I imagine it would have been hard for them to leave the country. But even more so, traveling in that way is always expensive for a production. So even if they had the opportunity to, I'm not sure that they would have had the budget. You know, and frankly, like, that's equally true of most of the British productions of the Holmes stories that I've seen. The one single street in London has portrayed 221B Baker Street in 99% of the productions that I've seen. So it doesn't matter if it's Jeremy Brett or Peter Cushing or someone else, they're all using the same front door for Baker Street. So, like, I don't think the Russians were struggling more than the British.
No, like you said, I mean, if you're looking for an adaptation that's going to stick to the original source material, I think they did a great job of that. Vasily, he does have that distinctive voice. And I was getting I've done a few shows where I'm reading the closed captions on some other shows. So it is a little bit more work. It does take a little more attention, but I could see him as Holmes, and he had the look. To me, he had the right look. I think Vitaly Solomin, I thought he made an excellent choice as Watson also. And I think he looked the part too. And he was always inquisitive. And he was trying to go out and do some of the things on his own throughout the series, not just play the sidekick. I think that made it.
Yeah, it's like it's to the filmmaker's credit. Like, you're absolutely right. I agree that these actors definitely resemble the characters as I would expect to see them. They're both young and energetic. I think that they got the age right. They are more young and vibrant as they would be in the Conan Doyle stories, as opposed to some of the productions that portray these characters as being older, somewhat older. Watson is an energetic guy. You know what I mean? Like, he's wounded, but he's still a young man just back from Afghanistan. I think that they're very well cast, and we can circle back to this too, but I think that the filmmakers went out of their way to reference the Sidney Paget illustrations from the original Strand publications in these stories, like in terms of the look of Baker Street, in terms of the look of the characters, in terms of the look of many things that we're going to discuss. A lot of what I saw looked like Paget's work recreated on film, and that was very impressive. That's not something I have seen done this well in any other production.
Yeah, I was very happy with the way all of it looked. And how much did you get into the second season at all, where they introduced Mycroft?
Only only to be able to watch the final problem, frankly. I plan to go back and watch this whole thing. I was impressed. I was entertained. I'm going to watch it as a fan now. But for the purposes of our discussion, I focused on season 1 and then the final problem.
Well, in the episode before the final problem, which they called Deadly Fight, they had the King of Blackmail, and that's based on Charles Augustus Milverton's story.
Yes.
And they did a scene, they kind of stole a scene from the Greek Interpreter, where they're doing deductions. This Mycroft, this was, how would you say? He actually reminded me more of like De Niro from The Godfather than Mycroft Holmes. But
interesting.
I think for their purposes, once again, we're in the Soviet Union. Many of like I said, they do combine the stories. And this was mostly them breaking into his house for Milverton to steal the papers, just exactly how the story goes. I did find it funny that when they were doing this, Watson, for some reason, looked funny. They're all wearing all black to blend into the background, and Watson had white shoes on. I don't know if they were like tennis sneakers to help her run or something. I just couldn't figure that one out. But the whole thing, much of that whole episode did play out. And then they went into episode 4.
Yeah, that was interesting. They treated it like a 2-part story with the Milverton story leading directly into the events of the final problem.
Yes. Apparently Milverton did work for Moriarty.
Yeah. That's the conceit here. I thought that was very interesting.
What did you think their final problem, which they named the Deadly Fight? And they actually, this whole season actually just run right together, because they did quickly turn around, and the third episode of the season was based on the empty house. So
yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I think that what I'll say is that episode 1 I thought was a really excellent production. And for anyone who goes and watches it, of course, it's going to be a European production of its time. So it doesn't look that expensive, but it's very, very well done. In terms of adapting both A Study in Scarlet and The Speckled Band. I thought that in some ways the production value of the episode titled Deadly Fight or Mortal Fight, which is based on The Adventure of the Final Problem. The look wasn't quite as cohesive. There's a lot of scenes taking place at a private club. I didn't think that the cinematography was quite as good as in the earlier episode. But in terms of an adaptation, I think it's probably my favorite adaptation of the story, The Final Problem. And a lot of that, for me, came down to the portrayal of Moriarty and the portrayal of the final events at Reichenbach Falls. For two reasons. One, I think, again, the filmmakers went out of their way to recreate the look found in Sidney Paget's original illustrations. I thought that the location that they chose, which I looked this up, it's Gigsky Falls in the Caucasus Mountains, was a very credible recreation of Switzerland and Reichenbach Falls. But the thing that I loved most, Bruce, frankly, is that we actually got to see the final confrontation between Moriarty and Holmes. Okay. In most my other favorite version is probably from the Jeremy Brett series. And I think that they did that very, very well. And it's probably one of my favorite episodes of that show. And it's a very good adaptation of The Final Problem. But in that, most of the confrontation appears off screen. And what we do see isn't the events themselves. It is like it's in Watson's mind's eye. It's his imagination of what occurred. Okay. And that is faithful to the story as Conan Doyle wrote it, because Watson was not a witness to the events. But in this Russian production, we are witness to the events. And I thought they were very well done. I thought that the fight looked like Sidney Paget's illustration, which we see here. I thought that it was a very interesting recreation of a martial arts fight as Holmes and Moriarty would have had, in terms of like the understanding of what that might look like in the 1800s. And I really like just like the way the action played out and the fact that we got to see the whole thing. I thought that was very, very cool. I think it's probably my favorite adaptation version of the story.
Yeah, because I don't remember seeing any version where they fought for as long as they did in this one.
True.
And they did play it up as far as a good fight. Did you like the look of this Moriarty? It was played by Viktor Yevgraf.
Yes. I had to look his name up too. So I have mixed feelings about the look of the character. What I'll say is that in the early scenes that take place at the private club, I think the portrayal of Moriarty is a little over the top. Like I think that they captured the Sidney Paget look of a tall, stooping, ghastly kind of individual. But I thought that the portrayal was over the top a little bit. I think that they cast this actor for his resemblance to Moriarty, and then they use makeup effects to play that up even further. But it's awfully severe. And in my opinion, this Moriarty is almost more of an Edward Hyde character from Jekyll and Hyde than he is Moriarty, because like his looks are extreme and his behavior is extreme. Whereas the Moriarty of the stories is the equal and opposite of Holmes. He's as intelligent of Holmes, but he's also as sly as Holmes, and he would be a guy who would disappear into the background. He was an invisible character in a lot of ways. And I don't think that the actor, Viktor Yevgraf, who portrayed him, looks in any way like he's going to disappear into the background. He looks almost like a mad scientist to me. Now, that said, I thought that that look worked for the final scenes at Reichenbach Falls. I don't know that it would have worked in an extended way. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Because like we've gone back and forth about what makes a good Moriarty portrayal, and I know that like we haven't quite found one that we loved yet.
Yeah, he definitely wouldn't be one of my top Moriartys, I guess. For the story, he served the purpose.
Yes.
And there was just something about his look that just didn't seem right to me. I can't figure out the right word. I have been thinking a lot.
Yeah, it's just over the top, isn't it?
Because I always think of him as somebody who's as intelligent as Holmes, somebody in the background planning everything out. He would have been the guy behind Milverton and different plots and stuff. But this guy never gave me that impression that he was there. And he was kind of scary looking. And I can kind of see where, if you look at the pageant photos, maybe they took that to the extreme. And when it came to the fight, before the fight, I kept looking at Moriarty and I'm like, this guy he looked like he was going to be too weak to really do anything. Because in the office, he karate chopped him.
Yeah, well, we should talk about that. That was a crazy scene. Like, like when Holmes goes to confront him in a private office in a private room at the club, right? They have this confrontation across the table that is like very subdued, and then Holmes out of nowhere karate chops him, and this guy, and I was like, what just happened?
And he's laying there like he can't do anything, like he's paralyzed.
Yeah.
And later on, he's going to have a reasonable fight with him. And it just kind of threw me off there.
I agree. That was pretty wild. That was a wild.
He's not somebody I would want to run into in a dark alley, but.
Right. Well, and that's where he looks like he belongs, doesn't he? He doesn't seem like the ultimate puppet master, like manipulating things behind the scenes. Like he looks a little bit, he looks pretty wild. Looks like kind of a nutcase.
Yeah, he did look out there. This is supposed to be a professor of, what was it, astrophysics? He just didn't look to me, but maybe that's the Soviet version of a Moriarty or a professor. I mean, if you walked into a class and that's your professor, you might be a little worried about.
That's true. He does not look like he just came from teaching a class at all. Which I guess is like the key. But I mean, like also, I think that this is a reoccurring complaint that you and I have both had, that portrayals of Moriarty on screen, especially the ones we've discussed so far, have like he's not a presence. You know what I mean? Like Moriarty is a dangerous individual, but in a quiet way. And so far, all of the portrayals that we've seen, he's kind of like a mustache twirling villain. I'm thinking back to Without a Clue, and that was our complaint as well. That,
but Without a Clue, I think it played to that type of movie better than in this.
Yeah, fair.
I just, his look just was wrong. I couldn't really judge him as an actor. I tried looking him up on Wikipedia or somewhere, and there's nothing for many of these other actors, but there was nothing else about him. Just all you could get is his name that I was able to find. So I don't know if he's done any other parts.
Well, you know what? If anyone listening has additional information, send it our way. We're on social media. Comment on all of the various channels where this podcast appears. We want to know more.
Yes.
But yeah, but I will say, like, I liked the final scenes of that episode. I enjoyed seeing the whole fight. I liked that it was extended. I liked that it was, for the purposes of this production, credible. I liked the way the events played out with Watson for the most part, although there was a peculiar thing that happened. It's an interesting dynamic because Holmes and Watson are at Reichenbach Falls, and Watson thinks that they are just taking it easy because they've wrapped up their case. And it's clear that Holmes knows they're not done. And so when Watson receives the letter to attend to a sick woman at the inn, as happens in Conan Doyle's story, and leaves, it's clear Holmes knows what's happened. He knows that this is a subterfuge and that Watson's being led away. And it plays out the way that we expect it to, with the exception of the fact that when Watson is going back to the inn, he walks right past Sebastian Moran sitting on a bench outside the inn holding a rifle case. And we know from earlier in the episode that Watson seems to know who Colonel Sebastian Moran is. And so, Watson's obviously distracted. It's not his finest moment, though, that you walk past your mortal enemy holding a gun and you don't see him. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I liked the way that Sebastian Moran was incorporated into these events, right? Because in the story, the impression that we have is that Holmes and Moriarty fight to the death. Now, no one is there to witness it, but that's our impression, that they go over the falls together. And other productions, that's the way it's been portrayed. In this, it's a close run thing, but Holmes does ultimately get the upper hand, and Moriarty goes over the falls, and Holmes almost follows him, but he's, gripping the edge of this crevasse. And it's Moran who shows up and puts this rifle together and starts taking shots at Holmes. That is what makes him fall. And we don't see him fall, but there's a very clear implication in the storytelling that that's what happened. Either that Sebastian Moran shot Holmes, or in shooting at Holmes caused him to lose his grip and he goes down. But then, interestingly, Moran disassembles his rifle, puts it back in the case, and leaves down the trail. And before long, Watson and the innkeeper return and find what's left of the situation. Somehow they didn't pass Colonel Moran on the path going back down. So I expected there to be a secondary confrontation where Holmes has confronted Moriarty and Watson has confronted Moran, because that's what it seems like, that they're heading towards each other, and yet it doesn't happen. They miss each other. So I presume that confrontation may happen further down the road, but it sure looked like they were setting it up to occur in this episode, and that's not what happened. But it's fine, because the episode more or less plays out the way Conan Doyle's story does, and it is satisfying.
Yeah, they definitely ended it the way it did in the story. If you haven't seen the next episode, I won't ruin it for you, but some of the things you mentioned are explained.
Okay. I'm gonna leave my desk and I'm gonna go back and watch it, because it did leave me wanting more in a good way.
There is one change they made going into the next, because you had all that play with Ronald Adair that he was going to get killed, because that's going into the next episode with Watson taking care of it. There's not the 3-year gap. That much I will tell you. Between the final problem and the empty house, I think the tiger is what they called the next episode.
Interesting. Okay.
Can't remember why now, but there was something to it. And they do go on. They do a Hound of the Baskervilles. I guess I won't get into that since I'll let you see it.
Well, look, if you want to talk about it, do it. This is a podcast where we deal in spoilers all the time. And if you need to spoil something that I haven't seen, go right ahead.
The Hound did it. But for the time that it was made, when you see the Hound in some of the production, and you got to remember it's 1979 Soviet Union. All the other productions, this was the one that the outside really just didn't carry for me. Maybe I'm wrong, but
okay.
Trying to imagine, or maybe I have the wrong image of English Morse, because I'm comparing, and it probably wasn't a fair comparison to compare this to the Hammer production of the Hound of the Baskervilles. It doesn't hold up to that. And my personal favorite is probably still the Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce one. It doesn't really I don't think it holds up compared to them. And the one part I really thought they should have done better, Henry Baskerville, they have him as an American. Basically, they have him acting like he's some American cowboy or something. And they bring him into, he plays comic relief in this as much as anything. So
Interesting.
that was probably my biggest complaint. Some of the other stuff, the production and stuff, I can overlook because of where they were, and you barely see the Hound. Let me just. And overall, like I said, I don't. What definitely wasn't my favorite. I think they did a pretty good, credible job of sticking to the stories as they have throughout the all the others where they are planned, because they did split it into 2 parts.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I still watched it. I still liked it. I still think it's a good overall series, but some of the things they did for the Hound of the Baskervilles, and this was where the outside, it was looking more like a very Russian than English more. I from my images, I guess.
Fair.
But they did the Hound where he had put phosphorus over the Hound's face and stuff. And it was a little bit of a different ending in that they were going after Stapleton, and he fell in. Well, I guess that is how he died in the stories. He fell into one of the moors and disappeared. So,
yeah, he gets sucked down in the Grimpen Mire. Well, let me ask you this, because episode 1 pivots at the 30-minute mark into an adaptation of The Adventure of the Speckled Band. What did you think of the way they handled that?
well, I thought they did a good presentation for the Speckled Band. I didn't remember them mentioning hyenas in the story, but they were there this time.
Yes.
But maybe you got to use the animals you have. Maybe that's what's available that for a wild animal.
I think that's possible. They also talked about a baboon being on the property, which we never see.
Because it was kind of nice. In one way, I liked it because they went from meeting all that from this. Then they went into that. And then in the second episode, they finish up a study in Scarlet.
Mm-hmm.
And that I really liked. I thought they did a very credible, very good the Speckled Band compliment. And wow,
I think that adaptation was probably equal to the version that I've seen from the Jeremy Brett show. Which is a compliment. I think that
yes.
That's one of the best versions that I've seen, and this is its equal. I think it was well handled. I liked how they handled the pivot, because we have had 30 minutes of Watson trying to figure out what's going on with this Holmes guy and being naturally suspicious. And then they have a confrontation where they clear the air that's entertaining. They talk about it over a boxing match, which I liked because it showed that both of these characters are very physical men. You know what I mean? They clear the air, and then pretty quickly, Julia Stoner shows up seeking their help following the death of her twin sister that leads into the Speckled Band story. And she tells her story, and very quickly it's established that like something dangerous is going on. And immediately Watson's reaction is, you shouldn't go alone. I'm going with you, And I thought that really helped establish their equal partnership well, especially because he says that. And then Holmes is like, well, in that case, you better bring your pistol. And you see Watson go and pack it. And that's what they do. So I thought that was credible. I liked it.
Being that they are taking this from the point they met, and then throughout the series, they become close friends. Mm-hmm. How did you think they played their friendship? I thought they did a credible job of that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. It was absolutely believable. It was believable that they're both like intelligent, active men. It's believable that they get to know each other. It happens in a natural way. And then it's totally credible to me that they're friends. Like it plays out well. I really, really, really liked the show. I'm going to go give the whole thing a view.
Yes, I do. Like I said, I didn't get to the last few. I did very much enjoy it. I do plan to finish it as soon as I get a little more time. I'm not sure my wife was as thrilled with Rush. She knows if there's something Sherlock on, I'm probably going to watch it. But when it's in Russian, I don't know if she's as thrilled with it. She does enjoy some of the others very much. So
that's cool. Well, and what I will say is like it can be challenging to watch a program that's in another language and try to keep up with it while reading the subtitles.
yes.
But also, frankly, like this is such an interesting adaptation, especially if you're a Holmes and Watson fan and you're familiar with the stories. Like I believe it's possible that a person could just watch this without trying to read the subtitles and just enjoy the performances and seeing how the actors portray the characters and how the stories blossom and have a fun time. Like I think that you don't need to read it to appreciate it. It's a good looking show. The actors are great. They're very well cast. And like you can tell like, oh gosh, this is the Speckled Band. Like you can see it happening without a lot of introduction. And I think that that's probably true of the other episodes too. Like you get into the final problem. You don't need to know what the characters are saying to know this is a fight between Moriarty and Holmes. So anyone who is feeling cautious, like leave your fear on the side table, sit down on the couch and just like absorb this Russian Sherlock Holmes.
And I did watch the adaptation of the Scandal in Bohemia. It's one of my favorite stories, and it does live up to the billing. I would put it up there with a Granada story, Jeremy Brett. I thought they did an excellent job of that, and Irene Adler. I can't remember. I didn't write that. I'm sorry, I didn't write that one down. Who played her? But she was a very beautiful redhead, and the guy that played the king of Bohemia that's about to get married. That was probably my only complaint. He had a funky looking mustache, and and I thought he should be a bigger man. Maybe I was looking at him the wrong way or something. But they did stick very good to the source material. If you could probably, if you know that story very well or semi well, you'll know what they're saying while they're up there saying.
Nice. That's great.
I think you'll enjoy that one because they did that one as a two-parter where it's mixed in with the Sign of Four.
That's great.
That was the season after the Hound of the Baskervilles. That was a Sign of Four in a Scandal in Bohemia.
Very cool.
In every, I should have wrote that, but they're all based on different stories in the canon, but they didn't really keep them in the same order, and sometimes they're intermingling the stories because, like I said, in the one episode, they did a scene from the Greek Interpreter. It wasn't the Greek Interpreter. In the last two that I got to get to, and I meant to do it for those that, if you're not listening to the area, before I had a tornado, I've been and I did a lot of working this past couple of weeks. And we talked about it in messaging, how the tornado affected us, and that put me a little behind on things. But the last two episodes,
a lot of scene up here.
The Adventures of the Engineer's Thumb, Adventure of the Second Stain, the Bruce Partington Plans, and His Last Bow. Those 4 episodes are in 2 episodes on here, and there's a couple there I would really like to see. So, I do think the early work, and you can say this about so many series, I think the early work's better than the later work. Maybe, hopefully, once in a while you get a series that breaks that trend, but I really, like you said, it drew you in on the first ones, and it's a shame there aren't more than 11 episodes in a way, because it would have been nice to see them do a few more, get a few more of the stories out there. I also feel like if it hadn't been the time frame, the Cold War era, 1979 to 86, they're behind the Soviet curtain, so it's hard to get this out. I'm not even sure what year it was 90s or 2000s before these really got out where people could get to see them. So,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the other problem is they are in Russian and you have to do the closed caption. But sometimes I don't know if I would want the voiceover after watching some of them.
I agree. But sometimes it's nice to see the way the original actors embody the characters without some other person's performance laid over top of it. You know?
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same type of thing.
Yeah. Especially like you said with the fact that Vasily Livanov has a very distinct voice. I want to hear his voice. I don't want to hear, a different, an actor with a British accent overlaying that. We might as well absorb everything that he had to offer because he was clearly working hard on his performance. And as much of a shame as it is that this media didn't get out of the Soviet Union sooner, it reached its intended audience. The audience was the Soviet people, and I can tell that they must have enjoyed it because it's a good production, and because, like you said, there's a statue of Vasily and Vitaly in Moscow as Holmes and Watson.
There was something else about him, and I can't believe I didn't put it in the note. Give me one second. But he actually was recognized by where is it?
While you're thinking, I had another thought that it's interesting. The episode 1, which introduces the characters in the universe, opens with an interesting title scroll that sort of describes the scenario, like the world you're entering. And they go out of their way to talk about how, like, this is a story from before police work had been modernized, and they specifically cited there are no helicopters, no cars, no radios to describe suspects. So everything Holmes is doing based on his own observations. And like they got so deep into it that I was like, wow, they're really describing a police state here. Like, what an oppressive society that must have been. And then I thought about it. I was like, we have all of those things here. We have police cars with radios. We have surveillance cameras. When I lived in Los Angeles, there were police helicopters chasing people like from the sky every night. It was constant. So like I had to kind of stop and laugh because I was like, oh, wow, I wouldn't want to live in the Soviet Union. And it's not really like what they're describing was, at least on the surface, I'm not trying to start a fight here, was like not that similar to modern policing anywhere. So it was interesting to see because I went in there with this mindset and then I had to kind of be like, maybe put that aside. Maybe that's not relevant to what you're seeing.
No, yeah, it was kind of like, I think if you were inside there, you just didn't know what you were missing from the outside world in a way.
It's all just people living their own lives, man.
Overall, I mean, maybe there's more good Russian Soviet Union television or movies that we just would never know about.
Right. Well, you bring that up. I've heard that there is a Russian television version of The Lord of the Rings. I'd be very curious to see that, and I'd be very curious to hear if anyone in the audience has watched it, what they thought of that. This isn't a Tolkien podcast, but we are talking about Russian television, so give us your best thoughts.
And I do know in the 2000s there were another. You can find them on YouTube, I believe. More Russian Sherlock Holmes. This was the original one that I wanted to talk about. I haven't seen those ones yet. It would be interesting to maybe sometime look into them. I haven't heard that they hold up as well as this one does.
Okay.
This is actually, by a lot of people, compared to the Granada series with Jeremy Brett, which I can see. I think you would agree with that. And like I said, other than the challenge with the language, I really enjoy it overall. I mean,
I would recommend this to anyone.
I do, like I said, I do pick out things here and there that I didn't like or thought should have been done different. But at the same time, I'm not the one producing the movie. I don't know what their budget was. I don't know what they had available, and it
Right.
was 1979 through 86. They were making this for, I mean, who knows what kind of budget Soviet television had.
Yeah, we don't know. And like, to be honest, that exact time frame is when the Dukes of Hazzard were on. So, we're not, let's not compare.
No,
I think that, I think that what you'll see is that, for an American audience used to a certain level of production, because television has been done for commerce, there's a lot more money going into the productions, and even if it's something like the Dukes of Hazzard, it looked expensive at the time. I think when you look at a lot of European productions of any kind, you see that they're not putting the same money into it. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that television in other countries was public television. It was funded by the state, and that's true of the BBC as well. And so a lot of the shows that you see from the same era from Europe have all of the characteristics that this show does, where they're shooting video, and not for a high-end video when they're outdoors because it's more portable. And then they're shooting film when they're in a studio, and so there's that different look. And a lot of the outdoor shots of Holmes and Watson walking around, especially outside Stockmorton Hall, right? It's all handheld, right? And so it's a little shaky, but at the same time, that gives it a sense almost like you're there. It's almost a documentary look. So with any production, your mileage will vary. I'm a big fan of the Doctor Who episodes from the 70s. There's nothing about them that looks expensive, but if you can set aside those expectations, put them on the TV stand with your coffee or whatever, and just enjoy it for what it is, I think you'll have a good time.
And they were actually very well received in Britain and the United Kingdom. I found when I was looking for, they pointed out, a lot of the critics of the shows pointed out that how they treated the original source material with a lot of care, a lot of respect, and did use a lot of it. And they transferred the atmosphere of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's work onto the screen. And in 2006, Vasily Livanov became an honorary member of the Order of the British Empire for service to the theater and performing arts. And
very cool.
There is Livanov's wax statue is displayed in the Sherlock Holmes Museum in London. So
that's nice.
They're
great actors, great performances, great casting. It's moved close to the top of my favorites.
I'm really glad we did this one.
Me too.
I had kind of did bits and pieces of it before, but I knew I needed to get more into it. And like I said, I was glad I took up the challenge of getting over the fear of what the Russian TV. And like I said, I have done other shows. But if they're not engaging enough, it doesn't matter. It would not have held my interest but this one does. And so I guess we are giving this some 2 thumbs up. I don't know if we're giving it 1 out of 10. I definitely would put this up there 9s. I'm going to go ahead and at least the first few episodes were 9s overall series.
Yeah, I would agree. A lot of care went into creating these.
Yes, you can tell that. And all right. Well, do we have anything else? I think we can wrap this up.
I think so. Do you have any recommendations for us this week, Bruce?
Oh, shoot. I didn't really bring anything, but I will recommend a podcast. I don't think I did this one before. The Sherlock Holmes Short Stories podcast with Hugh Bonneville. I think he has a great voice for it. They split up the podcast, the stories. They actually up into 2 or 3 episodes, so that none of them are very long. A lot of times I do them as a drive to work. And it's him retelling the stories, and then they'll recap what's going on when you get to the next episode. And I love his voice for telling these. He's got just that perfect English accent going for telling the Conan Doyle stories. Yeah, I thought they were only going to do the 56 short stories. I thought those but they actually did the Hound of the Baskervilles. He did read that, and they put it out one chapter at a time every week. So you were getting it kind of the way it went out originally in the Strand magazine. You only had to wait a week, and you get to hear it rather than read it at once a month. So if you get a chance, it's on all your major podcasts. Sherlock Holmes short stories with Hugh Bonneville. It's one of I put it up there if you're looking for someone to read the stories or audio version. I do put this up there pretty high. And like I said, if you have a little drive every day like I do to work, they're perfect for that. And you got anything this week, Eric?
Do you know what? I am gonna leave a couple of recommendations inspired by what we watched in our discussion. My first recommendation is for a comic book called The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen by Alan Moore, writer, and Kevin O'Neill, artist. Some people who might be familiar with The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen because there was a movie with Sean Connery. I would skip the movie. At least my recommendation is not about the movie. It's about the comic book volume 1. And the reason why is that the final fight between Holmes and Moriarty at Reichenbach Falls is presented on the page in this comic book. And it's one of my other favorite adaptations of that moment. So for people who are interested in Sherlock Holmes, I would check that out. Now, what I will say is that Holmes and Moriarty are not key figures in this. They're important figures, but mostly in the background of the story. But we do get to see the fight at Reichenbach Falls presented, and it's very interesting. The story of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, it's like a superhero team, but made up of characters from literature. So you have Alan Quatermain from King Solomon's Mines. You have Mina Harker from Dracula, Edward Hyde from Jekyll and Hyde, The Invisible Man from H.G. Wells, and a variety of others. And they all come together in an adventure story. Holmesians might find that interesting. Now, I will say, it's a comic book. It is not for children. There is nudity, sex, and graphic violence in this book. But if you're a grown-up and you can hold your own with that, definitely worth reading The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Volume 1, and see the Holmes fight. My second recommendation, which is also inspired by having watched the Russian Sherlock Holmes, is for a collection of short stories that are contemporaneous to Holmes about Raffles, the amateur cracksman. Okay. The reason why I'm recommending these is that I began thinking about this during episode 1 of the Livanov Holmes that we watched, because as Watson is getting to know Holmes, before there's a pivot to his understanding that Holmes is a detective fighting crime, he believes that Holmes is a criminal, right? So the Raffles stories are an equal and opposite. They're an inversion of Holmes, and they were created by an author named E.W. Horning, who was Arthur Conan Doyle's brother-in-law. And basically what he did was he took the story structure that Conan Doyle created, an interesting character, somewhat apart from British society, whose life is chronicled by his friend and roommate, and he inverts it. So you have a character named Harry Manders who meets this fellow named Raffles. He's a gentleman, but he's a thief. He's a gentleman thief, and that runs very counter to Victorian mores, right?
Yes.
And so they're interesting stories, and they really are an inversion of Holmes. First of all, Doyle did not like these stories at all. Okay. He didn't like that his brother-in-law stole his story structure, and he didn't like what he thought was the glorification of the criminal. Okay. But they are compelling stories. And if you want to see adventures of like an evil Holmes and Watson, I highly recommend them. So those are my two recommendations: League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Volume 1 by Alan Moore, and Raffles the Amateur Cracksman by E.W. Hornum, which Conan Doyle hated.
I haven't read either of those, but I will add them onto my list and see what I can do about finding them.
They're interesting. Check them out.
All right. Well, thank you. And thank everybody for listening this time. And I'll try it without the cheat. Igra Nashala. Wait, maybe I better bring it back up.
Игра началась.
Close enough.
The game is afoot.
The game is afoot.